الله محمد رسول الله.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد خاتم الأنبياء والمرسلين صلوات الله وسلامه عليه وعليهم أجمعين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما. آمين برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. أهلا وسهلا ومرحبا بكم. I welcome you back to our course on Imam al-Hadrami's Safinat al-Naja, a course covering ibadat or worship from a Shafi'i primer. Of course, we have covered a few lessons already, alhamdulillah. This is lesson number 3. Our course outcomes, which remains the same throughout the course, is specifically to introduce students to Islamic law, to allow students to take their first step into the legacy of the Shafi'i school, and to learn the 5 pillars of Islam at a beginner level. So, Bi-idhnillahi ta'ala, our lesson outcomes for this particular lesson is as follows. Firstly, to identify and understand the signs of puberty. Second, to understand the conditions of moral responsibility, or what makes a person duty-bound by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then third, the conditions of istinja with solid substances. And of course the details will follow, bi-idhnillahi ta'ala. So our course text commences as follows. قال المصنف رحمه الله تعالى ونفعنا الله بعلومه وعلومكم آمين. Our author states علامات البلوغ 3. The signs of puberty are 3. تمام 15 سنة في الذكر والأنثى. It is the completion of 15 years in the male or female. والاحتلام في الذكر والأنثى. A nocturnal emission or wet dream for a male or female, لتسع سنين, who is at about 9 years of age, والحيض في الأنثى لتسع سنين, and also menstruation in a female who has reached 9 years of age. So that's the first segment of text that we are dealing with in this particular lesson, bi-idhnillahi ta'ala. And now we cover that in a variety of forms. Firstly, the translation, which I've already sort of given, but this is included in your course notes. So the signs of puberty are 3. The footnote states when a child reaches the age of 7 and is mumayyiz, meaning the child is able to discern between right and wrong, good and bad. As you can see, the child is able to drink and eat by themselves or independently. They're able to clean themselves after using the toilet unassisted, and they are somewhat more mature than a toddler. So at that age, the child is already commanded to perform the prayer and all other injunctions pertaining to the prayer, including the wudu, covering of the awrah and so forth. But this is training, right? So when the child then reaches the age of 10, this training takes on a new level. And the child will actually get a hiding or be disciplined for not fulfilling the obligatory commands of the Sharia. So this comes from a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ in which he says, مُرُوا أَوْلَادَكُمْ بِالصَّلَاةِ وَهُمْ أَبْنَاءُ 7 سِنِينَ وَاضْرِبُوهُمْ عَلَيْهَا وَهُمْ أَبْنَاءُ 10 سِنِينَ وَفَرِّقُوا بَيْنَهُمْ فِي الْمَضَاجِعِ أو كما قال عليه الصلاة والسلام. So the Prophet ﷺ says, command your children with prayer when they are 7 years of age, and discipline them accordingly when they reach the age of 10, and also separate them in their beds. Now, of course, the hadith is predominantly about salah. I mean, it specifically says salah. But think of salah in this context as the yardstick of obligatory worship for any believer. That when salah becomes obligatory, then everything else that is also obligatory should be understood to be included. So if the Sharia asks of us to start training our children at the age of 7 and then to ramp up that training at the age of 10, then we should also understand thereby that all other injunctions of Islam, like fasting and, just obeying Allah's laws in general, staying away from haram and doing that which is obligatory, that should also now be taken to a certain degree of seriousness by the child and, of course, by the parents as well. But what we are looking at here in our course text are the signs of puberty. Why is this important? Why do we need to know the signs of puberty? So let us quickly look at the sharh. And for this, we are looking at Nailur Raja, the sharh of Safinat al-Naja. And the sharh reads as follows. Alamat. I'm not going to read everything from the sharh, or at least I'm not going to translate everything from the sharh, because we are reading the course text, translating it, explaining it. So essentially, I've included the sharh for two reasons. Number one, so that the student who is more advanced than the beginner can also benefit from the explanatory notes given in the Arabic language. Number two, as a reference for us, so that we explain the text, we have a translation of the text, and we also have the sharh that perhaps indicates on certain points that wouldn't necessarily come up in the translation or the explanation. A sharh is like a tafsir, right? It's an exegesis. So in traditional Islamic studies, you have the matan, which is normally concise, it's normally easy to remember, it's normally meant to be memorized. And then the sharh, which is the exegesis thereof, it can either be written by the author himself or by others. And this is essentially the explanatory notes on that particular text. And for this reason, we refer to the sharh when we prepare the lesson as instructors, and the students would prepare for the lesson from the sharh as well, so that when we read the matan, when we read the core text of Safinat al-Naja in this case, then we have broad insights as to the length and breadth of the masail. We don't only know the basics, but we also know the explanation thereof, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. So he says, alamat, the signs, right? The signs. Alamat is jam'u alamatin. It's the plural of sign. Wal alamatu, what is a sign? When we speak about the signs of puberty, what does this mean? Ma yalzamu min wujudihi al-wujud. A sign is that which, by its existence, yalzamu min wujudihi, what is necessitated by its existence is al-wujudu, the existence of something else. So the instant we have the sign of something, it means that by necessity, that which it indicates towards also exists, right? That's basically a technical way of saying that it is a sign. وَلَا يَلْزَمُ مِنْ عَدَمِهِ الْعَدَمُ. But at the same time, it does not mean that if the sign is not there, that which it indicates towards is also not there. So we take puberty as an example. The signs of puberty are 3, which means that if those signs are present, then there's definitely puberty. But it also means that if those signs are not present, it doesn't automatically mean that there's no puberty, right? There could be other factors as well. So the author is giving us an explanation of the term al-alama, right? Alamatun is the singular and al-alamat is the jammu annath salim, the sound feminine plural. So he gives us an example. He says kal-ihtilam, like a wet dream, right? Ihtilam. فَإِنَّهُ عَلَامَةٌ لِلْبُلُوغِ. A wet dream is indicative of the fact that the person who had the wet dream or the nocturnal emission has reached the age of puberty. يَلْزَمُ مِنْ وُجُودِهِ وُجُودُ الْبُلُوغِ. That if somebody has a wet dream, by necessity they have reached the age of puberty. وَلَا يَلْزَمُ مِنْ عَدَمِهِ عَدَمُ الْبُلُوغِ. But it does not mean that if they did not have a wet dream, that they had not yet reached the age of puberty. إِذْ قَدْ يَحْصُلُ أَوْ يُحْصَلُ بِغَيْرِهِ. Because you can also determine, or rather you can also have attained puberty even if you haven't experienced the wet dream, and Allah knows best. He says كَالْحَيْضِ, like menses, the menstrual cycle, وَتَمَامِ الْخَمْسَ عَشْرَةَ سَنَةً, as well as the completion of 15 lunar years, وَالْبُلُوغُ. And then he gives a definition for puberty. He says هُوَ الْوُصُولُ إِلَى حَدِّ التَّكْلِيفِ. Puberty is the reaching to the limitations of duty-boundedness or moral responsibility, which we'll elaborate upon in a bit, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. So further elaboration, and I'll just read through the rest inshallah. أن العلامات الدالة كل واحدة منها على بلوغ الإنسان حد التكليف أي بشرط العقل 3: تمام 15 سنة في الذكر والأنثى. المعنى أن الأولى من علامات البلوغ أن يمضي على الصبي أو الصبية من بعد انفصال جميع بدنه 15 سنة قمرية تحديدية. So we've explained this before, and I would like to sort of just read some of the sharh so as to introduce, especially for the English-speaking students. You may not get as much exposure to the sharh because the idea is it's a beginner course. We're introducing you to the matan, but it's important that you find accessibility with the sharh so that you can refer to it when the need arises, inshallah. And this continues down that same trajectory. الاحتلام في الذكر والأنثى ل9 سنين. There is the sign which is a wet dream. It applies to both male as well as female if they reached 9 years of age. What this means, we carry on from here. المعنى أن الثانية من علامات البلوغ من علامات بلوغ الصبي والصبية خروج المني بعد إكمالهما 9 سنين قمرية تقريبية، فلو وصل إلى القصبة ثم عاد كأن يمسك ذكره عند إحساسه به لم يبلغ به عند ابن حجر وخالفه الرملي. So this is an example of how the sharh would benefit us to a degree that is not necessarily required at this level. And what is that? So we've already explained that a wet dream for a male or female who reaches approximately 9 years of age is generally going to not happen before that, and it could happen later than that, that this is a sign of puberty. But there's a difference of opinion. So our scholars, they sometimes differ. And this sometimes leads to differences of schools of thought. So we have the Maliki school, the Hanafi school, the Hanbali school, the Shafi'i school. Now, of course, we don't need to be concerned with differences at that level right here because we are focused on the Shafi'i school and an introduction to the Shafi'i school. But within the Shafi'i school itself, we still find differences of opinion. The school is founded by Imam Shafi'i, and differences of opinion start there already. Imam Shafi'i he is renowned to have had 2 official positions on some issues. He had his older views, which he taught when he was in Iraq, and some students transmitted his older views from him, the most renowned of whom would be Ahmad ibn Hanbal, rahimahullah ta'ala. But then he had his newer opinions, which is what he taught in the final 4 years of his life when he moved to Egypt. And there, his madhab as we know it today was founded and was the foundations of which were laid. This is what has been transmitted from him, rahimahullah ta'ala, and what has been developed by the Ashabul Wujuh, or the scholars of the Shafi'i school, who also contributed to the legacy of Imam Shafi'i, rahimahullah ta'ala. So the madhab then develops until eventually you have others contributing to matters that Imam Shafi'i didn't necessarily elaborate on. And therefore, you have a variety of opinions. You have the likes of Imam al-Ghazali, rahimahullah ta'ala, and his teacher Imam al-Haramain al-Juwayni, and others as well, who contribute towards the Shafi'i school. But then we have all of these opinions and all of these ideas of what the Shafi'i madhab represents. But we needed someone to synthesize this for us, and we needed someone to tell us, well, while these opinions exist, the madhab, according to the principles of the school and according to the teachings and the evidences of the school, is essentially this opinion. And the 2 individuals who came to do that for us, and this is a very summarized format of this particular history, we generally deal with this in the more advanced courses. Those who came to do that for us were Imam al-Nawawi, rahimahullah ta'ala, as well as Imam al-Rafi'i, rahimahullah. First Imam Rafi'i, then Imam Nawawi. So when we ask what is the Shafi'i madhab's view on a particular point, generally the fatwa would be given according to the work of Imam Rafi'i and Imam Nawawi. Where they differ, sometimes they differ, so where they differ, the views of Imam Nawawi would be given preference because of a variety of factors, again, which we elaborate on in the more extensive courses. Sometimes, however, the works of Imam Nawawi rahimahullah ta'ala also require explanation, elucidation, and elaboration. And the scholars who had come after Imam Nawawi and commented on his works, essentially the primary work here would be the Minhaj al-Talibin, and the scholars who commented on that, they are known as the Shurrah, those who, or rather the exegetes of the Minhaj al-Talibin. So they wrote commentaries on the Minhaj. And examples of this would be Mughni al-Muhtaj by Khatib Shirbini. It would be Tuhfat al-Muhtaj by Ibn Hajar al-Haytami, and then you have Nihayat al-Muhtaj and a variety of other works. Shaykh al-Islam Zakaria al-Ansari, Imam al-Suyuti, and several other scholars commented on the works of Imam Nawawi, rahimahullah ta'ala, specifically the Minhaj. Now, from among those works, the two scholars whose opinions are weightier in terms of fatwa, and fatwa is given according to their views, would be Ibn Hajar and Imam al-Ramli. So where the two of them agree, then of course that would be the fatwa of the madhab. And where they differ, now scholars differ as to what exactly should happen here, but the view that was espoused by many contemporary Shafi'i schools is that the mufti, the one giving the fatwa at this stage, can choose from either school. So that's some background that I will definitely not be repeating at this level or in this, course, because it's aimed at a beginner level. But it's important for us to at least understand the background, that when the Sharh says something like this, we know what's going on. So here, the Sharh taught us that there are certain signs of puberty. But what happens if a young man or a young woman, they experience a wet dream, right? But they don't actually ejaculate. So they felt, فَلَوْ وَصَلَ إِلَى الْقَصَبَةِ ثُمَّ عَادَ. So they felt that semen or sexual fluid was going to come out, but then they returned it. They held it back. How? كَأَيُّمْسِكَ ذَكَرَهُ عِنْدَ إِحْسَاسِ. So for example, in the case of a male, perhaps he held his private part so that he could withhold the ejaculation and not emit the sexual fluid. So at that point, our scholars differ, where Ibn Hajar says that the person who does this, he has not reached puberty, whereas Imam al-Ramli says, well, even if he does this, while the semen may not have exited, it was there, he experienced the feeling, and so he also reaches the age of puberty. Now you can see that this level of difference is generally going to be in the hair-splitting issues, right? Generally speaking, in the fundamental issues, we would have our answer from Imam Shafi'i rahimahullah ta'ala, and just further than that, we would have our answers from the Ashabul Wujuh, the scholars of the madhab. But in hair-splitting masail, we would often have differences, and scholars went either way, and this would be indicated by words such as this, عند ibn Hajar and then عند al-Ramli. So now at least we have some background, and when the Sharh mentions something like this going forward, we would be somewhat in the loop, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. Now we look at another aspect, because we've spoken about puberty, but puberty does not equate religious responsibility. What is religious responsibility, and how does one attain that? So in Islam, we believe that children are born in innocence, ala al-fitra. This means a natural disposition towards goodness, towards innocence, and towards tawheed, the belief in only one God. That's the natural disposition of a human being. This is in stark opposition to another concept by one of the other monotheistic religions, Christianity, wherein there's a very strong belief on the concept of original sin. That because of, and of course this is the Christian narrative, that because of the quote-unquote sin of Nabi Adam alayhi salatu wasalam, according to them, all of humanity is born into sin. And it was only because of Jesus dying for the sins of humankind that that people are saved. Now, of course, we don't believe in that. Subhanallah, that is, for us, that's shirk. But it's important to understand that there's a fundamental difference here between the way Islam views the natural position of people, like what state people are born with, as opposed to other religions, because it sheds a lot of light for people, especially if you have not been exposed to this type of discussion before. So essentially what it means is that a child is born sinless and innocent, but when does that child then become able to commit sin? When does the innocence of that child now become vulnerable to the point where it can be affected by what they do? So a child below a certain threshold who has not yet reached certain conditions in Islam, no matter what that child does, they are not going to be duty bound, they are not going to be mukallaf, they are not going to be burdened, as in held responsible by Allah for their actions. Not for their actions, not for their statements, for nothing. So at which point do they actually become mukallaf, where what they say and what they do they'll be accountable for that by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the answer is not at the age of bulugh or puberty necessarily, but rather at the age of bulugh plus another factor, which is sanity, right? What we refer to as aql. That when a child has both aql, sanity, as well as puberty, right? Then the child would generally be considered to be mukallaf, duty bound. But when exploring this mas'ala further, this particular issue, there's another point that comes up, and that is you are also only considered duty bound when you have access to guidance, right? There's this common misnomer, this misunderstanding that if I don't know, then I'm fine, right? As long as I don't know, then I'm fine. In other words, ignorance is bliss. This is not true. So in Islam, the predominant view is that if you had access to guidance, then ignorance is not bliss. So is someone who has sanity, puberty, and access to learn Islam and learn the rules of Islam, are they regarded as innocent and completely blame-free for anything that they do and they say? No. If you have sanity, aql, and you have reached the age of puberty, and you have access to guidance, then you are considered duty-bound in Islam. And this is what we refer to in one term as mukallaf. So you can translate this as religious responsibility, moral responsibility, duty-bound, right? But that is mukallaf. La yukallifu Allahu nafsan illa wus'aha. And Allah does not cause duty-boundedness upon anyone beyond their capability. That's what that verse actually means. So now that we've covered that, it's important to understand that in our discourse of discussions in fiqh, we are going to be looking at the actions of the mukallaf. Because fiqh is essentially the address of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in relation to the actions of the duty-bound. Fiqh is going to tell the duty-bound, the responsible person, what they must do, what they must not do, what they may do, what they preferably shouldn't do, what they preferably should do. These are the commands, these are the instructions by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the duty bound. And if they comply, they earn Allah's pleasure. And if they do not comply, then they are in the disobedience of Allah. So these terms, these are going to be frequently utilized terms in fiqh. So for that reason, it's important for us to understand that in the Shafi'i school, when it comes to these terms, these legal rulings or legal pronouncements, it is important to understand that the actions of the duty-bound are categorized into 5 different rulings or judgments. These are essentially the judgments of Allah on the actions of the duty-bound. So these rulings indicate the permissibility or otherwise of any given action. In other words, in Islam, regardless of what you can fathom, any action of a duty-bound person will have a hukm, a legal ruling attached to it. So right now, I am sitting. Am I duty-bound? Have I reached the age of puberty and do I have aql? I hope so, inshallah. And do I have access to guidance? So in all these cases, the answer would be yes. So therefore, sitting, which is an action of the duty-bound, has a religious ruling attached to it. In other words, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has something to say about the act of sitting. So in the case of sitting, the legal ruling is what? Is it compulsory for me to sit? Is it recommended for me to sit? Is it permissible for me to sit? Is it disliked for me to sit? Etc. Now, of course, you may jump to the answer, but the point here is not the answer, the point is the process. So the answer is it's permissible for me to sit. So the legal ruling in relation to me, a duty-bound individual, sitting right here, right now, is that it is permissible. So these terms require some understanding, and also, in the case of students at this level, memorization. So you should memorize the ma'ani, the meanings of these important sacred rulings. So these 5 rulings of the sacred law are as follows. There's wajib or compulsory actions, mandub or sunnah actions, mubah or permissible actions, makruh or offensive actions, disfavored actions, and finally haram, forbidden actions. Each one of these actions, they have a definition. So we'll go through the definition, but also bear in mind that these actions, or rather these rulings, they have synonyms as well, some of them. In the case of the first one, the wajib action, compulsory action, if one does this action, one will be rewarded. If one does not fulfill this action, one will be liable for punishment. Tamam? There's a synonym for this, and that is fard. In the Shafi'i school, the wajib action and the fard action are one and the same, meaning that the terms are interchangeable in the Shafi'i school, right? And this applies to practically everything except for Hajj. In Hajj, there's a special definition for wajib and a special definition for fard. Other than that, it's the same thing. Secondly, the mandub action, also known as the sunnah action, is that which is recommended. One will be rewarded for doing it, but one will not be liable for punishment if one omits it. There are synonyms for this word as well. Sunnah is also referred to as mustahab, that which is sought to be lovely. It is regarded as lovely. It is regarded as beloved, right? Mustahab. And another word for this is, so there's mandub, there's sunnah, and there's mustahab. There's also nafl, right? Nafl, which technically means voluntary, but generally in the Shafi'i school, they will be pulled together. So again, what does that mean? You'll be rewarded for doing it. You will not be held accountable for any punishment upon omitting it. Number 3, there's mubah, right? As I said, for sitting, in my instance here, mubah, which means it's permissible. There's neither reward nor punishment for doing it or omitting it, right? There's a lot more that can be said for these rulings, but the idea here is just so that you have an understanding of these terms before we start utilizing them in our discussions of fiqh. Makruh, the offensive action. It is that which one will be rewarded for omitting it, for not indulging in something that is considered makruh or disliked. One will be rewarded for that. But if you indulge in it, you will not be held accountable for punishment, right? Bearing in mind that if you are watching this and you are following the Hanafi school, these terms may be somewhat confusing for you, and that's understandable because there are differences between the Shafi'i school and the Hanafi school for these terms, right? In the Shafi'i school, there's only makruh. There's no division of makruh into tanzihi and tahrimi. There's just makruh. Whereas in the Hanafi school, there are differences. So I'm not going to get into those differences because at this level, I may just cause more confusion than anything else. But for the Hanafi students, if you're watching this, if you're listening to this, if you're following along, it's best that you reconcile this with a Hanafi teacher and from Hanafi texts. This is specifically for the Shafi'i students. And then finally, of course, we have the haram or the forbidden action, that which one will be rewarded for abandoning it. If you do not do that which is haram, you will get reward by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But if you indulge in that which is haram, then you are liable for punishment. Now notice I've been saying liable for punishment, because naturally as believers we also understand that somebody may do something, be liable for punishment or accountable by Allah, but then that person could make tawbah, in which case it gets wiped away. So I just added that word so you understand this is not like set in stone, but this is the definition as per the legal rulings and what we need to know when we study fiqh. So these 5 terms, we need to understand them and memorize them. Why? Because in every instance of fiqh discussion, you are going to find these terms being utilized. And if you don't understand what they mean, then you may not understand the issue correctly. Another very critical issue here is to not abuse your understanding of these terms. I think it's probably something that many students go through, in that when you learn and you come to discover that the meaning of a sunnah, or the meaning of that which is mandub, is that I'll be rewarded for doing it, okay, fine, but I will not get punished if I leave it off. And unfortunately, students would focus on the latter part, which is that, okay, I will not be liable for punishment. The same thing applies with makruh. Oh, so if I do it, I will not be liable for punishment. We should not focus only on that part. It's very important for us to have a well-balanced understanding of these legal rulings, because they are holistic. They are not just one-sided. So when it comes to that which is sunnah, think about it as, the more I do it, the more reward I will get, inshallah. Makruh, think about it as this which is disliked, meaning Allah doesn't like it. He doesn't like it. His extent of dislike for it is not that much that he's going to punish me, but he still doesn't like it. And I don't want to do anything that Allah Ta'ala does not like. And this is a very important balance when you are studying subjects like fiqh, and especially usul al-fiqh, because they are technical in nature, but it's important for us to create that balance for ourselves so that we are not led astray by our own interpretations or misgivings about knowledge. Sacred knowledge is there for us to improve our relationship with Allah, and not to impact it in a detrimental way. Wallahu subhanahu wa ta'ala a'lam. So I trust, inshallah, that we will do that which is required here to understand these definitions, to memorize these definitions, and to apply them accordingly, and not to abuse them, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. طيب, we proceed. Then I've included this hadith because it sets the tone for the first chapter of discussions in fiqh. قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم: مفتاح الجنة الصلاة ومفتاح الصلاة الطهور. أو كما قال عليه الصلاة والسلام. The keys to paradise is the prayer, and the keys to the prayer is the processes of purification. Right? The processes of purification. So we all want Jannah. We understand, after studying Aqeedah and understanding that Allah exists and He created us for a reason, we understand that we have a purpose, and our purpose is to pass the test of this world by obeying Allah and believing in Allah firstly, and obeying Him and following the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. And in exchange, when we meet Allah in the Akhirah, He will not subject us to punishment, and He will give us an eternal reward in the form of Jannah. The Prophet ﷺ says in this hadith that the ultimate key to Jannah is the prayer, and that the ultimate keys to the prayer are the processes of purification. This is very significant. Another aspect to this is the way things will work on the Day of Judgment. There's a hadith in the Sunan of Imam al-Tirmidhi reported by Abu Hurairah radiallahu ta'ala anhu, who says that the Prophet ﷺ said, إن أول ما يحاسب به العبد يوم القيامة من عمله صلاته. The very first question that Allah Ta'ala will ask about on the Day of Judgment when we meet Him is about our prayer. And we can imagine the type of question is going to be, did you perform your prayer? Meaning every single prayer. And how was it performed? Was it performed in the manner that it was meant to be performed? And then the hadith carries on to say, فَإِن صَلَحَ فَقَدْ أَفْلَحَ وَأَنْجَحَ. If the person is successful in their answering of the first question, فَقَدْ أَفْلَحَ, this person has attained success, such a success that is falah, there's no failure thereafter. وَأَنْجَحَ, and this person has passed the test. However, if the person cannot answer this question successfully, so they fail in the first question, then Allah will first tell the angels to go and look if this person has supererogatory acts to make up for any discrepancies they may have had. So they didn't pray on time, or they didn't fulfill the arkan and the shurut, the integrals, the conditions, and so on. They didn't pray as they were supposed to pray. Then in that case, Allah sends the angels, look at His mercy. He sends the angels, go and find, does this servant have supererogatory acts of worship that we can patch up what they are missing? Subhanallah. But the point here being that after this, of course, if they patch up, alhamdulillah. If they don't patch up, this person is in trouble. Because the rest of the hadith says, then all of the other acts of worship would follow suit. So the prayer is the first discussion to be held, the first testing to be done on the day of judgment. So if we want to be successful in our prayer, which of course we all do, then we need to be successful in our processes of purification. Because the key to the prayer is this. Miftahu salati at-tahur. The keys to prayer are the processes of purification. So that commences our kitab al-Tahara. And the first discussion that our author has about Tahara or purification, Tahara means purification, is this chapter on purifying oneself after relieving oneself in the bathroom, in the toilet, and how to clean oneself. So قال المصنف رحمه الله تعالى شروط إجزاء الحجر ثمانية. The conditions of sufficing with stones to clean oneself, they are 8 in number. Now already we may be shocked a bit by just the mere suggestion of cleaning with stones. So let's put this into context. First and foremost, everything that we discuss, inshallah, will be contextualized so that we can understand it within our own modern or contemporary setting. That's my job, that's the instructor's job, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. Secondly, understand that when we study fiqh within a traditional setting, right, like Seeker's Guidance, and any traditional seminary around the world, we generally rely on the classical literature. Now, there are times where the classical literature may seem outdated. And in a certain sense, it may be, right? Nobody cleans themselves with stones really. But there's a very important reason why we maintain our connection with the classical literature. They are twofold. Number one, because by studying the classical works, we connect ourselves with that chain of classical scholarship, that traditional chain of scholarship that extends all the way from our teachers right up to the Sahaba, to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who gave us two things. In the sense of his teachings, he gave us the teachings of prophethood, but he also gave us the nur of prophethood. As my teacher put it, rahimahullah, ilmun nubuwa and nurun nubuwa. Now the ilm, the knowledge of prophethood, is something that develops. It's something that is contextualized in the various times and ages, right? And there are lessons that are solidified, and the implementation sort of develops over time. So that's easy enough for us to comprehend, right? There are certain tools and methodologies that have developed over time. But then there's also the Nurun Nubuwa, which is the illumination of prophethood, which is the reason for which Jibreel ﷺ was sent as a teacher to Muhammad ﷺ, who was sent as a teacher to the Sahaba, who was sent as a teacher to the Tabi'een. And the transfer of knowledge was not just done through books and pages. Like the Prophet ﷺ could have woken up one day and just know the entire Quran off by heart, but Allah sent a teacher with the book over 23 years, because it's more than just the knowledge. So for this reason, we study classical literature. But the classical literature are very much relevant in this day and age, especially within the chapters pertaining to worship. Worship doesn't change. So even though the primary example given in this particular chapter is hajar, stones, Imam Nawawi rahimahullah ta'ala was a 7th century scholar. He came and he said, well, anything suffices in its place. So toilet paper, any form of paper, if there's a new invention in future, the idea here is a solid substance. What was prevalent in the time of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was the usage of stones, right? But in a different context, you replace stones with something else. The point is, how do you clean yourself with a solid substance, and what else should you need to know? So he gives us 8 conditions, because istinja, or cleaning oneself after after defecating or urinating is done in a number of ways. The most effective way is going to be with water predominantly. And water would normally be even more effective when it is combined with a solid substance. So you take a solid substance, you clean yourself, and then you take water and you clean yourself again, which is the ultimate way of cleaning oneself. And that's how most Muslims do it in the contemporary context. But what we are doing here is defining. So what is the extent to which I need to be clean? And what are the conditions to ensure that Islamically I am clean and not just by way of the five senses? There are conditions that need to be met. And then this specific segment teaches us about if I want to or have to suffice myself with a solid substance. In other words, I don't have access to water, or there are water restrictions, or there's just no water around, there's a drought, mathalan. Then how do I clean myself with only a solid substance? So in our case, how do I clean myself with toilet paper or any other form of paper or cleansing material, right? This segment would give a clear explanation of that. So this is essentially how it's going to be throughout our study of ibadat, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. So he says, أَن يَكُونَ بِثَلَاثَةِ أَحْجَارٍ. The first condition is that you use at least 3 stones. There's explanations to all of this. I'm just translating first. The second condition, وَأَيُنْكِيَ الْمَحَلْ. It must clean the area. Third condition, وَأَلَّا يَجِفَّ النَّجَسُ. That the impurity should not have solidified or dried. Number 4, وَلَا يَنْتَقِلْ. The impurity should not have moved from place to place. Number 5, وَلَا يَطْرَأَ عَلَيْهِ آخَرٍ. No other impurity should have mixed with the impurity in question. Number 6, وَلَا يُجَاوِزَ صَفْحَتَهُ وَحَشَفَتَهُ. The impurity should not have surpassed or transferred to beyond the fold of the buttocks or the private area, the head of the private area of the male, or the part of the private area of the female that would be exposed when she squats. So it should not have gone beyond those limits. Then number 7, وَلَا يُصِيبَهُ مَاءٌ. The impurity should not, or rather the item that you are using to clean yourself should not have become wet with water. And then finally, وَأَن تَكُونَ الْأَحْجَارُ طَاهِرَةً. That the solid substance must be pure. It must not be contaminated. It must not have impurity thereon. So that's a basic translation. We look at the translation again, this time with footnotes and the explanation, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. So the conditions for using a stone to clean the privates are 8. So if you look at footnote number 3, you'll see there are footnotes here, and they correspond with the footnotes on that side. If you look at footnote number 3, it says, stones suffice to clean oneself. In other words, a solid substance is sufficient to clean oneself, though it is best to follow this up with washing with water. We've mentioned that as an introduction. The optimum way to clean oneself is water preceded by a solid substance. That's ideal. But there are other methods, so we need to explain that. And then footnote number 4 says it is wajib to use water if the following conditions are not found. So now we can understand the priority. These conditions are if one wants to limit oneself to the usage of a solid substance alone, or if one needs to. So you go to a bathroom and you only have toilet paper, you don't have water. You need to ensure that you fulfill these conditions in order for that toilet paper to suffice, even though you don't have any water available. And that can suffice, just fulfill the conditions. If you cannot fulfill these conditions, however, then you are obliged to use water. Now, of course, at that time you may not have water, which means you would remain unclean, at least in the Sharia sense, until you have access to water, and then you can clean yourself, insha'Allah ta'ala. طيب. We continue. Point number 1. So we're back on the text itself. 3 stones should be used. Footnote number 5 says it is wajib to use either 3 stones or 3 sides of a stone. The idea is that if you were to use one stone, right? So let's say the stone is the size of this AirPods thingamajig. So if you use a stone like this, then if you can manage to get 3, then you use 3 separate stones, right? As opposed to the same one, because you're going to be contaminating it. After you wipe with it once, you'll contaminate it. However, your other option is to use 3 sides of a stone. So assume your stone is big enough and say it's the size of this pouch here. So now you could potentially wipe with one side, with another side and another side. So you have 3 separate sides, neither of which are going to become contaminated by wiping with the other side. So those are the options that you have. Number 6, footnote number 6, reads as follows. Anything that is solid, pure, and removes filth can suffice, right? Anything that's solid, pure, and removes filth can suffice, whether that's newspaper, toilet paper, grass. But there are conditions, of course. So Imam Nawawi rahimahullah in his Majmu', he explains this very clearly, that you can use anything that is solid instead of stone. He says, something deserving respect, like an instrument of knowledge, for example, or page from a book of knowledge, right? Or something edible. This cannot replace the use of stones. And there are obvious reasons for that, and Allah knows best. Next, number 2, it should purify, meaning that whatever it is that you use must actually be able to clean the area. Footnote number 7, it means to remove the filth so that nothing remains but a trace that cannot be removed except by either using water or some other form of extreme measure. That is the extent to which you must purify yourself if you limit yourself to a solid substance. So let's look at toilet paper, for example. A person goes to the toilet, they relieve themselves, and they wipe with toilet paper. For some reason, they don't have access to water. In that instance, they may use the toilet paper, and what is obligatory for them is to clean themselves until nothing remains of the excrement except such a trace that they cannot get rid of unless they were to use water. That would be considered clean enough, right? Whatever remains, that trace that we spoke about, that is considered ma'fuun anhu, which is overlooked, it's pardoned, it's not considered as being filthy. Now naturally, for someone accustomed to modern day living and conveniences, this may seem like something that you wouldn't want for yourself. And that's good, because Islam encourages for you to be clean. However, what this saves you from is circumstances wherein it is not possible to clean yourself to that extent. Then you know that you don't need to wipe yourself with toilet paper to such an extent that you actually hurt yourself, because that's what would happen if you were to attempt to remove everything, even the trace that remains behind, and Allah knows best. Number 4. So we're back onto the text here. The impurity should not have spread out. Right? So footnote number 9 says, the impurity should not reach any other part of the body. So if, for example, you relieved yourself, whether it was urine or defecation, if the urine or the defecation touched any other part of your body, then you cannot use a dry substance, a solid substance, to clean that part. You have to use water now, because it's gone beyond the limits of what a solid substance can do for you. We move on to number 5. Back on the text, number 5. No other impurity should come upon it. So if, for example, you have, I think a good case of this would be a lady in a menstruation cycle. Perhaps she's cleaning herself, and then somehow she's got blood, and the blood mixes in with stool, right? In that case, once that happens, now you cannot just use a dry solid substance. Now you have to use water, because one impurity mixed with another impurity. We move on to number 6. He says the impurity should not go beyond the inner buttock and the head of the penis. So this is number 10. Footnote number 10 says inner buttock refers to that which is enfolded when standing. And of course we know what the head of the penis is. And the same thing would apply to the woman's vagina, except that there's a far greater room in terms of what would be considered in and outer, and the general had, the general distinction is that which is exposed when she squats. Number 7, water should not splash onto the stone. Number 7, footnote number 11 states that it will not be valid to use a wet stone. Now, just like we said earlier, you can replace the word stone with any other solid substance. Toilet paper is therefore not going to be enough if you clean yourself with wet toilet paper only. So if you take wet toilet paper, you don't take dry toilet paper, you don't take water, you only take wet toilet paper. That would not be sufficient to clean oneself. Why? Because with wet toilet paper, according to the Shara'i definition of how filth is spread, you will be spreading the filth as opposed to removing it. The idea in separating at first dry toilet paper, then water, is that the dry toilet paper removes the filth without spreading it, because filth is spread by moisture. And then the water would come and wash the traces away. However, if you are going to be using water in any part of this process, then understand that water removes the filth and the traces of the filth as well, as long as you do it, as you use it efficiently. So you wipe and you wash as you should wipe and wash, so that there's no trace remaining. Now it's irrelevant as to whether you use wet toilet paper or anything else for that matter, because it is as though the wet toilet paper or whatever else you used is extra. That the minimum requirements of cleaning have already been sufficed or will be sufficed with the usage of the water, and Allah knows best. So the only problem is when people use a wet substance only. So somebody may go to the bathroom thinking, I don't have access to water, there's only toilet paper available. They perhaps don't know that you can only use, or that you can use only toilet paper. So they think, okay, let me use wet toilet paper. If they then use wet toilet paper alone, without using any water, this does not clean, this actually spreads the filth, even though they may wipe to the extent where they don't see any filth except perhaps a trace. So in their minds, they are clean. But according to the Sharia, that wouldn't suffice for cleaning. They would have to resort to using water on top of all of that, and Allah knows best. So that was the translation with the explanation. Now there's a few ayat that I wanted to share with you, because the asl in Islam, the original form of cleaning is with water, and that's the default. Water cleans everything, right? Why? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم هو الذي أرسل الرياح بشرا بين يدي رحمتي. He, Allah, is the one who sent the winds as a bringer of glad tidings, بين يدي رحمتي, which brings the glad tidings of the wind. Right? The wind comes, it brings the glad tidings of the rain. So the wind comes and it blows and it makes us understand that Allah's rahmah is coming, Allah's rahmah is here, the rain is coming. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also teaches us in this ayah, as well as many, many other ayat of the Quran, that the ultimate source of purification is in fact water. Right? So water is the asl, it's the original ruling. Water is that which we clean ourselves with. So he says further in the ayah, وَأَنزَلْنَا مِنَ السَّمَاءِ, and we send down from the heavens, مَاءً, water, طَهُورًا, طَهُورًا, not طَاهِرًا, but طَهُورًا. Now the reason why that's important is the word طَهُورًا is on a scale of hyperbole in Arabic. So it's not just pure, it's extremely pure. How does something become extremely pure? Because it's not only pure in and of itself, but it also has the intrinsic ability to purify other things. And built into that word is the evidence that our scholars had utilized that suffices as evidence to say water cleans absolutely. Another example of a verse such as this, in the Quran, Surah number 8, verse number 11, Allah says, بعد أن أقول أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم إذ يغشيكم النعاس أمنة منه وينزل عليكم من السماء ماء ليطهركم به ويذهب عنكم رجز الشيطان وليربط على قلوبكم ويثبت به الأقدام. In the context of Badr, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions this verse, but the point that we specifically want to look at is وَيُنَزِّلُ عَلَيْكُم مِّنَ السَّمَاءِ, and Allah sends down from the heavens for you, alaykum, upon you, ma'an, water. Why? لَامُ تَعْلِيلِ li, in order that لِيُطَهِّرَكُم, so that it purifies you, bihi, with it, meaning with the water. So water is the ultimate form of cleanser. However, we also know from the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam that we can purify ourselves with more than water, in other words, with something else beyond water, such as solid substances. So the evidence of this is Sayyida Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha Ummul Mu'mineen. She says that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, when any of you goes to relieve himself, he should take with him 3 stones to clean himself, for there will be enough for him. Mentioned in Abu Dawood. So there's evidence that you can suffice yourself with the usage of only a solid substance. It's also proving the matter of 3 stones or 3 sides of a stone. You can see some fiqh working there. He said 3 stones, but they've also sort of ascertained from that or deciphered from that 3 sides of a stone would suffice. And another narration reads, the Prophet ﷺ was asked about cleansing himself after relieving, or rather cleansing after relieving oneself. And he said, one should cleanse oneself with 3 stones, which should be free from dung. So there we find the proof that the stones must not be contaminated. It must not be filthy. You cannot use, for example, dry dung of another animal as a substance to clean yourself with. And then the final hadith that I want to share here is the concept of the odd number, right? So Jabir ibn Abdullah radiallahu ta'ala anhu, he reported that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, odd number of stones are to be used for cleaning the private parts after answering the call of nature. The casting of pebbles at the Jamrah is to be done by odd numbers, and the number of circuits between Safa and Marwa is to be done in an odd number, which is 7. Whenever you are required to use stones for cleaning the private parts, you should use an odd number of stones, 3, 5, or 7. So how does this work? If you suffice yourself with cleaning with a solid substance, then the ruling is you must at least have 3 wipes. So that's where the 3 stones or 3 sides of a stone comes in. That's the bare minimum. But is that enough? Not necessarily. If 3 wipes is enough to remove the filth to such an extent that nothing but a trace remains behind, such a trace that can only be removed by water, then 3 stones or 3 sides of a stone is enough. However, if you wipe 3 times and on the 3rd wipe there's clearly still filth, and much more than just a trace, right? So it's not just a trace, but there's more filth remaining. You cannot say, well, I wiped 3 times, khalas, it's done. You have to wipe enough times to ensure that nothing remains behind, but only a trace that can only be removed by water. And if you reach this point at wipe number 6, mathalan, then it is recommended to add another one so as to make it 7. Or if you reach this level of cleanliness at wipe number 8, then you should add another one to reach 9 so that you have an odd number. Why? To follow the sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. So even though 4 wipes may suffice, you should add 1, which is sunnah. Even though 6 wipes may suffice, you should add 1 to make it 7, which is sunnah. But now what happens if you wipe once and it suffices, like you realize that you're done? If you wipe once, you have to complete 3 wipes because 3 wipes is the minimal. The exception to this is when you don't need to wipe at all, even though you relieved yourself. And that may shock you. But if you relieve yourself and the human excrement that came from your body is completely dry, if it's dry such that it leaves no trace behind, then it is no longer obligatory for you to wipe yourself. It is recommended, right? So in that case, 3 wipes is not required, and Allah knows best. So there's a few points from the sharh. I certainly won't read everything. We already at our limit in terms of time, but there's a few points that I thought would be interesting to mention here, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. And the first is the hukm. So if you look at the hukm of wiping, the hukm of istinja, he says the hukm, the ruling, now we've discussed this at the beginning of the lesson, so let's test our knowledge. Al-wujub, it's wajib to wipe. When? Min kulli najasin mulawwithin, from any form of najis, any form of filth that is mulawwith, that causes other things to be filthy. In other words, moist filth, right? Whether that's urine or excrement. If it's moist, then it's wajib to wipe from that. Wan nadbu, recommended, meaning it's not wajib, but it is mandub. What does mandub mean? If you do it, you get rewarded. If you don't do it, you will not be held accountable for punishment. You will not be liable for punishment. When is it mandub to make istinja? It is mandub to make istinja min al-jamid, when you have dry filth. So you went to relieve yourself. It's human excrement, but it's completely dry, right? You didn't hydrate yourself very well, so it's dry for some reason. Then it is not compulsory to wipe or to use water for that matter. It is recommended. The third ruling, he says, wal karaha. I thought I'm showing you this, excuse me. The third ruling, he says, karaha. So the first, it can either be wajib or it can be mandub, that's his nadb, or it can be makruh. How can istinja be makruh? He says it can be makruh min al-rih. So if you break a wind and you then go to the bathroom and you want to be so clean so as to make istinja after breaking a wind, then this is considered makruh because you are going beyond what the Sharia requests of you. And when you start doing that, you can actually make things difficult for yourself, and it can affect you through a very, very serious disease known as waswasa, or religious scrupulosity. So you don't do what the Sharia does not require you to do. If you break a wind, you broke a wind. It doesn't cause any filth under normal circumstances, so it's considered makruh to make istinja from that. And then it can also be mubah, right? Ibaha, meaning it's permissible. When is it permissible to make istinja? So it's not wajib, it's not mandub, it's not makruh, but it is mubah, merely permissible. You won't get rewarded, nor will you get punished if you do it or if you leave it. When? Min al-ariq, or araqi rather, from perspiration. So if you perspired, right, and you know that you've perspired around your private area, then it's permissible to make istinja, but it's not necessary. And then finally, interestingly enough, it can also be haram, wal-hurma. When will it be haram to make istinja? He says, كَأَن يَكُونَ بِمَغْصُوبٍ, if you make istinja with something that has been stolen. So the istinja would be valid, but you use something that was stolen, which is haram. So therefore the act of doing that would be haram, even though your istinja would be valid. So that I thought was interesting because it gives us an opportunity to discuss the rulings. And as you can see, it would be very neglectful of us as students to not understand these terms if they are going to be utilized in practically every lesson of fiqh. And as opposed to just a general idea of, okay, makruh means it's bad, haram means it's, to have a very structured definition that we know, we understand, and we've memorized, that would be ideal, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. Then as for the rest of the sharh, it's there for you. I'm going to include it, inshallah ta'ala, as the lessons proceed. I will read from it sometimes, I will omit at other times. My preparation will come predominantly from there, Nailur Raja. But I would encourage those who have the ability or who would like to aspire to that ability to try and read as much of the sharh as possible, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. So it's there for you in the notes. Of course, for those who have registered for this course, and even if you haven't, then do kindly do so ASAP. You can register for this course on seekersguidance.org. This is called Imam al-Hadrami Safinat al-Naja. You can also find the registration link in the description of this platform, wherever it is that you are watching this from. And inshallah ta'ala, we can now conclude with the summary of this lesson. In this lesson, we dealt with the signs of puberty. We looked at the concept of taklif, or moral and religious responsibility, like when are we morally and religiously responsible by Allah. And then finally, we looked at the conditions of istinja and sufficing ourselves with a dry, solid substance for istinja and what is required with that. Tamam, I would like to leave you with a question, inshallah. What is the best method of istinja? Stones or water? Right? That's a question for you to think about and to try and answer. By the end of this lesson now, you should be able to answer it. And of course, to really test your knowledge, for those registered, you should do the quizzes attached to each lesson of the course, which you'll find on the course page in Moodle. For those who have registered, you'd know what I'm speaking about, inshallah. So do the course quiz, and you would know that you've absorbed the basic information that is enough to get you through to the next lesson. Barakallahu li wa lakum. Until next time, inshallah ta'ala. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad. Subhanallahi wa bihamdi. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته.